can't get rid of them at concerts, asking these questions about, you know, what made you write this.
In the spring of 2025, the Rolling Stones performed at the Kia Forum in Los Angeles. Mick Jagger was 81 years old. He ran, not walked, not moved with dignified energy, not performed a version of the thing he used to do in deference to the body's reasonable requests at 81. He ran, across the stage, back to the microphone, away from it, down the catwalk, back to center, for 2 hours and 14 minutes, in front of 18,000 people who were not watching him perform his age. They were watching him perform. Afterward, a journalist asked him how he still did it. Not how he still performed. That question had been asked 10,000 times across 60 years. How he still ran. He said, "Because I can." He said it without the performance of humility and without the performance of pride. He said it as a statement of fact about a body that has been carefully, obsessively, non-negotiably maintained for 50
very famous rock star. I'm Mick Jagger.
Loco foragido.
years. Trained at 5 in the morning, every morning on tour, 12 kilometers of running before the crew had finished setting up the stage, and that has responded to that maintenance by continuing to do the thing it was trained to do. The casual observer does not see the 12 kilometers. The casual observer sees the man on the stage and reaches for whatever word they have available for the specific quality he radiates: energy, charisma, sexuality, danger, and what they don't see is the infrastructure beneath the quality. The infrastructure is Mick Jagger's least glamorous and most serious secret. He built it in the 1980s when the commercial peak had passed and the critical establishment had moved on to the next thing, and he has not stopped building it since. Because he understood something that most performers in their 40s do not understand, that the performance at 61 requires the discipline at 41, and the performance at 81 requires the discipline at 61, and the discipline...
Why don't you go to a hotel?
A hotel? You must be joking.
That is the story that the memes about his children's ages do not tell. That is the story that the tabloid coverage of his private life and the 24-hour news cycle's obsession with everything except the work does not tell. The story of a man who took the most kinetically spectacular physical performance in the history of rock and roll and decided, at an age when most performers are accepting the graceful limitation, to build the infrastructure that would allow the performance to continue, and who is, at 81, still running because the infrastructure held. Have you ever committed to a discipline so completely that the discipline became invisible? That what people saw was the result of the discipline, while the discipline itself receded into the background of the story? Because that is the architecture of Mick Jagger's public life. The spectacle is visible. The work that makes the spectacle possible is not. But Dartford comes first. Because before the infrastructure and before the spectacle, there was a boy who was good at everything and bored by all of it, and a train platform and a stack of records. Michael Philip Jagger was born on the 26th of July, 1943 in Dartford, Kent. His father, Basil Joe Jagger, was a physical education teacher, a man who believed in the body as a disciplined instrument, who had popularized basketball in Britain, who brought into the household the specific conviction that physical capability was not a gift but a practice. His mother, Ava, was a hairdresser of Australian descent and a Conservative Party activist. The Jagger household was middle class in the aspirational British mode, not wealthy, but pointed, with a clear understanding of what the right education and the right discipline could produce. Mick was a good student. He excelled at Dartford Grammar School and earned the marks that earned him a place at the London School of Economics, which he began attending in 1961. He was studying business administration. He had a plan. The plan was conventional and sensible and had the full endorsement of his parents and the trajectory of his academic career, and it ended on a train platform.
That I have some sort of view which other young people
in
think
Dartford,
the same.
When he ran into a boy he had not seen since primary school. Keith Richards. Carrying a stack of American records, Chuck Berry, Muddy Waters, Little Richard, under his arm. The two boys had known each other at Wentworth Primary School. They had lost touch when their families moved. They had not seen each other in 7 years. They stood on the platform and discovered that they shared the same obsession with American rhythm and blues, the same conviction that this music was the most important thing in the world, and the same understanding that finding another person who felt this way was not a small thing. Richards invited Jagger to rehearsals. Jagger went. He never returned to the London School of Economics. Have you ever made a decision so fast that you barely registered making it, where the choice presented itself and your body had already moved before your mind had completed the analysis? Because that is the train platform. The plan was assembled. The train platform
Great.
ended it. And what replaced it was 64 years of the most sustained creative output in the history of rock and roll. The Stones were formed. The mythology is told elsewhere and in detail. The Crawdaddy Club, Andrew Loog Oldham, the kitchen where Oldham locked Jagger and Richards and told them not to come out until they had written a song. The recording of As Tears Go By, the first #1s, the American tours. The comparison with the Beatles that both bands professed to find tiresome and that both bands used as fuel. What is less told is what Mick Jagger was actually doing in those early years, not performing, which he was clearly and immediately good at, but developing the thing that the performing required. He was studying, not formally, the way a person who has decided they are going to be the best at something studies, by watching everything, absorbing everything, taking apart every performance he ever saw, and understanding what produced the specific response in the audience and what didn't. He watched James Brown. He watched the American R&B performers who toured Britain in the early 1960s and who brought with them a physical vocabulary that no British performer had yet developed. He watched Wilson Pickett. He watched Tina Turner. More precisely, he watched Ike and Tina Turner, and he has said, in multiple interviews, that watching Tina Turner perform was one of the formative education experiences of his performing life. He was not learning steps. He was learning the relationship between movement and sound, between the body and the voice, between the performer's physical commitment and the audience's physical response. He was also at the same time watching the crowd. Not the crowd the way a performer watches a crowd, not to gauge approval, not to feel the energy, to study. What produces the response? What changes the temperature of the room? What is the specific physical gesture that unlocks a stadium of 50,000 people from passive reception to active participation? He understood this early and precisely as a technical problem, not a charisma problem, not a talent problem, a technique problem, and technique was something you could study. The 1960s unfolded in the way that the 1960s unfold for the Rolling Stones, at an acceleration that most people experience as a blur and that Jagger appears to have experienced as a curriculum. The records, the tours, the arrests. The Altamont concert in December of 1969, where a man was killed in front of the stage while the Stones were performing, and which Jagger has described with the specific, helpless quality of watching something terrible happen through a screen with no ability to intervene. The death of Brian Jones, the original visionary of the group, the multi-instrumentalist who had assembled the Stones in the first place and who was found at the bottom of his pool in July of 1969. 2 days later, the band played a free concert in Hyde Park. Jagger wore a white dress. He read Shelley.
I mean, after you read certain poetry, then you get interested in it.
He released Butterflies that were largely already dead. The gesture was strange and somehow completely right. By the early 1970s, the Rolling Stones had become the entity that the phrase greatest rock and roll band in the world was coined to describe. Exile on Main Saint, recorded in the basement of a rented chateau in the south of France, in a period of collective dysfunction so total that the album should not have been possible, and which is, by the assessment of almost every serious student of popular music, one of the 10 most important records in the history of the form. Some Girls. Tattoo You. The world tours that broke every attendance record previously set, including their own. And then, at some point in the early 1980s, at the exact moment when the commercial momentum had crested and the critical establishment had decided that the Stones were a legacy act and the cultural conversation had moved to punk a new way.
Buongiorno. Can I use the phone?
Mick Jagger made a decision that nobody noticed at the time, and that explains everything that has come since. He hired a personal trainer. He changed his diet. He began running 12 kilometers a day, every day on tour, every day not on tour if he could manage it. He began doing yoga. He hired dance teachers, not because a tour was imminent, because he had decided that the performance he wanted to give at 50 required the body that only the discipline at 40 could produce. He was 40 years old. He had already been the most electrically physical performer in popular music for 20 years, and he concluded, with the specific analytical clarity that he had brought to watching James Brown and Tina Turner in 1963, that the only way to continue doing what he did was to treat the doing of it as athletic training and the body as an athlete's instrument. He has said, "You have to train for a Stones tour the way you train for a professional sports season."
Very famous rock star, Mick Jagger.
Louco foragido.
He has said this in various forms across 4 decades of interviews, always with the same quality, not self-congratulatory, not performative, but matter of fact. He trains. The training produces the performance. The performance is what people see. The training is what people don't see, which is how he prefers it. Have you ever done something for so long and so consistently that people began to describe it as natural talent, and understood that what they were calling natural was the accumulated product of 30 years of deliberate work? Because that is the 8-year-old man on a stage in Los Angeles in 2025, running. The running is not natural. The running is the discipline of 40 years. The rupture with Keith Richards in the late 1980s and early 90s produced some of the most entertaining public grievance in the history of rock. The mutual interviews, the competing memoirs, the specific theatrical acrimony of 2 men who had been in the same room for 30 years and had run out of diplomatic language for the things they disagreed about. Richards called Jagger's solo albums mixed solo adventures. Jagger called Richards's complaints boring. Both were right about the other. Both went on making music. The rupture healed because the alternative, the Stones without both of them, was simply a worse version of both of them. The private life has been the most commented upon element of a public life that offers many elements for comment. Bianca, Jerry Hall, the 8 children, the relationships that began and ended, and some that began and continued. He has said, "I'm not very good at long-term relationships," meaning marriage. He has also said, of Laren Scott, his partner for 13 years who died in 2014, "She was my lover and my best friend." He has not said much more than that, because what happened is not something he intends to narrate for an audience. He issued a statement. He canceled the remaining tour dates. He grieved. He went back on stage. Charlie Watts died in August of 2021. Charlie Watts, who had been the heartbeat of the Rolling Stones since 1963, the man who made the Stones swing in ways that no other drummer in the history of rock has been able to replicate, who dressed in Savile Row suits and collected antique cars and was fundamentally bewildered by the celebrity that surrounded him for 60 years, but showed up for every tour, every session, every recording, because the music was what mattered. Jagger said, "He was a great musician and a wonderful man." 14 words. He went back on stage with Steve Jordan on drums. The Hackney Diamonds album was released in October of 2023, the first album of original Rolling Stones material in 18 years, the first without Charlie Watts. It won the Grammy Award for Best Rock Album in 2025. Critics who had been writing the Stones' obituary for 30 years used words like essential and vital and thunderous. Jagger was 80 when it was released. He co-wrote most of the songs. They are good songs. Of course they are good songs. He has been writing songs since Andrew Loog Oldham locked him and Richards in a kitchen in 1963 and told them not to come out until they had written something. The craft that was developed in that kitchen 60 years ago is still being practiced. He is still here. In 2025 and 2026, the No Filter and Hackney Diamonds tours continue. He runs 12 kilometers. He does the yoga and the ballet and the weights. He goes on stage and he runs, because he can, because the infrastructure he built 40 years ago held, because he treated the physical demands of the performance with the seriousness that the performance required, and because at 81 years old he has not been given a sufficient reason to stop. He said, in a recent interview, when asked whether he thought about stopping, "I think about it occasionally." He said, "And then I go for a run." He said it with the equanimity of a man who has had the answer to that question for 40 years, and finds the question itself slightly beside the point. The run is the answer. The stage is the answer. The 12-kilometer answer that he gives his body every morning has been, across 4 decades, the most complete statement of what he intends to do with the rest of his life. There is something in Mick Jagger's story that the 60 years of headlines and the tabloid coverage and the memes about his children and the cultural assessments of what the Rolling Stones represent do not contain. It is in the decision, made at 40 years old on the far side of the commercial peak, to build the infrastructure that would make it possible to still be running at 81. It is in the train platform in Dartford, the decision made before it was finished being made. It is in the kitchen, with the locked door and the first song. It is in watching James Brown and understanding that what you were watching was technique. It is in the 12-kilometer run at 5 in the morning while the crew sets up the stage. These things are not visible from the front row. They are the reason there is a front row. What would you be willing to build, quietly, consistently, without credit or commentary, over decades, if the goal was to still be running at 81? Leave a comment below, because that is the question Mick Jagger has been answering since he was 40 years old and decided that the career he wanted at 80 required the discipline he started that year. He started it. He kept it. He ran. He is running still. If this story found something in you, subscribe and tell me in the comments, which Rolling Stones performance do you think was the moment the band was most completely itself? Because the answer to that question tells you something about what you believe the band is actually for. And Mick Jagger, who has been running 12 kilometers a day for 40 years so that the band can keep being itself, already knows his answer.